Tomorrow. The Prime Minister says the UK is out in front giving humanitarian assistance to Ukrainians.
The Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Home Secretary are directly descended, Mr. Speaker, from refugees. And we understand how much refugees have to give to this country, and we understand how much this country has to gain from welcoming refugees. And we will be generous, and we are being generous, Mr. Speaker.
The Ukrainian president says his country has shown it will not surrender to Russia. The UK Ministry of Defence says Russian troops have not made any significant breakthroughs as fighting continues to the northwest of the capital. In the air, Ukrainian air defence is also preventing Russian fighter jets from achieving any degree of control. But 4 cities are currently encircled by Russian forces and continue to suffer heavy shelling. President Volodymyr Zelensky told Ukrainians only a short time separates them from freedom.
All the cities where Ukrainians are resisting, where they are protesting against the invaders. No, we stand with you. We are grateful. The cargo will still go, no matter how many bullets stop them. Humanitarian corridors will still work, and only time separates you from freedom. Short time. Believe in it. I believe.
Ukraine's foreign minister has accused Russia of holding 400,000 residents of Mariupol hostage by shelling the port city despite efforts to establish a safe evacuation corridor for civilians. It's after Russia said its troops would stop firing there, along with 4 other Ukrainian cities, to let civilians evacuate. Previous attempts to establish humanitarian corridors have largely been thwarted by Russian attacks. Sumi's regional governor says evacuation of his city continues after 5,000 civilians fled there yesterday. Yulia Gritsenko escaped Kyiv and is now in the Lviv region. She told us many Ukrainians are spending most of their days in bomb shelters.
In the other regions, the situation is quite grave now. People are sitting in the shelters from almost all day. And, why there are no many footages from citizen journalists and so on. It's just because not always you can go out and take some pictures because you just may die.
The Labour leader says the Prime Minister cannot blame the UK's rising energy bills on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as pressures existed before the conflict. Well, UK drivers are going to be hit by the second largest daily hike in diesel prices for more than 20 years. The average cost of a litre now stands at a record 165.2 pence. Experts have warned sanctions on Russian oil will further increase prices at the pump. The UK has promised to phase out Russian oil by the end of the year. In some other news now, a climber has died on Ben Nevis in Scotland. It's the 3rd fatality in the region in the last 5 days. Rescuers work to reach 17 people stranded on Britain's highest mountain. A 7-year-old boy has made history today by becoming the youngest person ever to present a petition to the Scottish Parliament. Callum Isted is making the case for every primary school pupil to be given a reusable water bottle. He told the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon it would help reduce plastic waste. The ancient wreck of Endurance has been found on the bottom of the sea in Antarctica. Sir Ernest Shackleton's ship was discovered over 3,000 metres down. It is the first glimpse of the famous vessel since it was crushed by ice and sank on its fateful expedition in 1915. You're now up to date. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head over to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Is Vladimir Putin's invasion crumbling? The last week may have brought brutal bombings and cold-blooded attacks on civilians. But in terms of Russian military gains, things seem to be grinding to a halt. Ground forces have failed to encroach upon more central territory, and that 40-mile convoy, still loitering on the outskirts of Kiev, has analysts wondering whether the stationary tanks could become frozen death traps for the soldiers inside. The anticipation is that Putin will have to focus on the battle in the skies. And that is where Ukraine needs help. In the form of fighter jets, something President Zelensky has directly appealed for. But only a handful of countries own the Soviet-era warplanes used by Ukrainian forces, MiG-79s. And those countries border Russia, making them a perilously easy target for retribution. So a tug of war over who could send the jets has started, with Poland offering their fleets to America in return for F-16s, which saw America reject the proposal, worried about any NATO fingerprints on hardware directly attacking the Russian military. Meanwhile, the UK debates whether sending anti-aircraft missiles would be considered bolstering Ukraine's defences rather than attack weapons, while Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has been taking questions on the UK's emergency energy security strategy. Well, we've had a busy PMQs and it's still busy in Parliament now. Our political correspondent Tom Harwood has the details. He joins us live from Westminster. Tom, Ukraine, of course, dominating all of the sessions in Parliament today.
Certainly was. It was a boisterous Prime Minister's questions, and perhaps unexpectedly, it was the Labour leader who didn't go on the refugee question. Sir Keir Starmer going on energy prices, asking the Prime Minister to U-turn on these measures that the Chancellor has brought in. Although there was a bit of a spring in the Prime Minister's step when he replied to the Leader of the Opposition, saying the Leader of the Opposition wants me to U-turn on the help that we're giving to people with their bills. A classic back and forth Barney there in those leaders' questions. It wasn't until the SNP's Ian Blackford stood up that the refugee crisis, something that has dominated the front pages, got mentioned, however. Blackford saying that the UK wasn't doing enough, demanding the UK dropped visa requirements altogether for Ukrainian refugees. However, the Prime Minister came back at him with by citing the proud record the United Kingdom has on this issue.
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody sympathises with the plight of refugees, and this government wants to do everything we can to welcome them, and that is indeed what we are doing. And the numbers are almost 1,000 as I speak to him today, and they will rise very sharply, Mr. Speaker. They are uncapped. We expect those numbers to rise to in the region of the hundreds of thousands. As Vladimir Putin doubles down in his attacks, we will go further, Mr. Speaker, and there will be routes by which the whole country can offer a welcome to people from Ukraine, vulnerable people fleeing from Ukraine. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, will be setting out that route in the course of the next few days. This government has a proud record. We've done more to resettle vulnerable people than any other European country since 2015.
Now, Tom, a hot topic of debate today is quite what NATO can do, or more importantly, what they can send without inviting retaliation from Russia. And I understand that amidst this squabble between the US and Poland over who might or might not be able to send MiG jets to the Ukrainian forces, Ben Wallace has been also talking today about whether we can send anti-air aircraft missiles.
He certainly has. Ben Wallace had a statement immediately after Prime Minister's questions where he set out actually a lot of the help that the UK has already provided, being one of the first countries since the start of this year to send these NLAW weapons, these new light anti-tank weaponry systems. We've sent 3,615 of those now to Ukraine. Although, interestingly, Ben Wallace also said that we are now exploring for the first time sending what are called Starstreak missiles. These are anti-aircraft missiles that can be launched at aircraft bombing civilians overhead. That's a significant development, of course. However, when it comes to this swapping situation of various forms of aircraft, Poles giving aircraft to Americans, giving aircraft to Ukrainians, that seems to came to a juddering halt last night, despite the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that that was a possibility. The Department of Defence seems to have rowed back on this. NATO as a whole rowed back on this issue because it seems that they are walking a very tight tightrope between what could be classed as defensive weaponry and therefore not dragging NATO into this conflict, and what might be classed as offensive weaponry, which may well risk NATO being in direct conflict with Russia. If Russia sees NATO providing or indeed getting involved with offensive weaponry, suddenly we're in an entirely different ballgame. And a NATO versus Russia conflict, well, that is a nuclear conflict.
Tom, thank you ever so much. Well, I'm delighted to be joined today. Who better than the former Director of Global Operations at the Pentagon, Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt, who also happens to be an expert in energy security. Mike, fantastic to have you on the show today. I mean, how much can we unpack? Let's begin on talking about, first of all, this sort of squabble between the US and Poland as to who might be able to send jets to Ukraine. Should either of them be doing so?
Oh, I absolutely think so. I mean, at this point in time, we need to be doing everything we can for the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military to fight to save their own country. And I do understand some of the miscalculations that can come with providing that kind of hardware. But at this point in time, it's completely legitimate to hand the Ukrainian Air Force MiG-29s, which they're trained in, they're equipped in. We have resourced them to fly these airplanes in a time of conflict. And I think we can make it very clear to Vladimir Putin, we're providing this weaponry not as an offensive NATO tack, but more in providing the Ukrainians exactly what they need to defend their country. And I think it's time for us to have a little more spine when it comes to this miscalculation of Vladimir Putin and make it clear to him that we intend to support Zelensky and his military every way we can.
I mean, this is something that President Zelensky has been appealing for almost by the hour here. Is it a risk, perhaps, to our own strategy to be having these conversations so openly in the media, where Putin could potentially then use some of the lines that have been said in justification for not sending these planes if we then do a U-turn on saying, well, look, this is clearly an act of aggression?
That's precisely what he wants us doing. This is all about information operations at this point in time. This is about asymmetric warfare. It's about calculating where the red line is for us in terms of NATO or the United Kingdom or the United States. What will we do? What will we not do? And I think he is drawing this out into the public discourse because I don't think he sees us as a real threat. So he's creating more limits for us. We already told him we weren't going to put troops into contact. We told him we weren't going to provide the kind of overhead support that the Ukrainians asked for. Now he's drawing us out on providing weaponry. And I think that's a dangerous game. And he's, I think, winning this public perception right now.
And would there be, do you think, any inherent risk if we are to send the anti-aircraft missiles, if those MiG jets do go to Ukraine? Do you think that could create an escalation of conflagration way beyond the borders of Ukraine across the continent of Europe? Or is that just what Putin wants us to believe?
That's what he wants us to believe. I am careful to say there could be a miscalculation in this back and forth. But what Putin is really doing is the strategy of terror, which is built on fear. And he wants us to be overthinking these kinds of things. He wants us to believe that he's going to expand beyond Ukraine and draw NATO into a conflict, when in fact, I don't believe that's his intentions at all. He wants us to limit our ability to support Ukraine by thinking about a larger conflict. And right now, he's winning that conversation back and forth.
I mean, just when we think finally there's a consolidated approach in the West, where we finally managed to get Germany into a position where they're prepared to go after some sanctions, although we're hearing that Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, is still pushing back upon withdrawing Russia from the SWIFT international payment system to the extent that perhaps the US and the UK would want them to do. But here we go, another fight within NATO over how far NATO are prepared to go to bolster Ukraine in resisting Russian invasion. It seems that we make a few steps forward and then lurch backwards again.
We do, and I think we've miscalculated Putin for so long, both as the United States as well as NATO, and really didn't understand. I think we put him into this position that he's in today as much as he put himself in this position. And what he is doing right now is he is forcing us to think about the outcome of a NATO conflict. And what he wants us to do is not provide the weaponry that we're talking about. He also wants us to forget that this is about energy. This is not about territory. This is really about energy sovereignty, just as they were discussing on the floor today, an hour ago. This is about energy security and energy sovereignty. And we can talk about the nuclear power plants in Ukraine and him taking these over, using this as critical infrastructure. He has no intention of destroying these plants. He has every intention of taking them over and running them. This is not the traditional kinetic fight that the media is portraying this as. This is much more complex than that. And I think we really need to be thinking about how we put ourselves in this position and what do we need to do to get out of it. And I think it's easy to say a total defeat of Vladimir Putin is the only answer. Someone's going to have to help us understand what that means. Because right now, I don't think we have any sense of the end state that we're trying to achieve right now.
Mike, thank you so much. You brought up some very important issues there that we are going to be covering after the break. You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Time now for a short break and a check on the weather forecast. I'm back very shortly to pick up those threads on things such as energy policy.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGiven. A fine day to come in the east with some sunshine, but wet in the west, especially western Scotland and Northern Ireland, and increasingly windy, particularly in the northwest, ahead of a weather front which is moving in very slowly from the Atlantic. The isobars squeezing together ahead of that front with the risk of gales or even severe gales during the morning across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. But those winds do ease as the front moves through. It's a slow-moving front, but it gives some heavy rain for western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, and then eventually that rain pushing into Wales and the southwest. A blustery day for most, but actually that wind coming from the south means that for central and eastern England it's sunny skies and mild, 12 to 14 Celsius, but it turns colder for Scotland and Northern Ireland behind the front, and the rain falls as snow for a time across the Grampians and Highlands above 400 metres during the afternoon and evening. As we head through the night, a lot of cloud remains and the rain tends to peter out. It becomes lighter and more patchy, still mostly affecting western parts of the country. Clear spells ahead, but mild, 7 to 10 Celsius. Colder behind the front, northern western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, seeing a touch of frost to start the day on Thursday. Then Thursday brings with it a lot of cloud cover, further spells of mainly light rain for Scotland, northern England, and later on perhaps for southern and central England as well. But Wales, the southwest, East Anglia and the southeast sees sunny spells, and it's going to be mild once again, 14 Celsius in London, 9 or 10 for Belfast and Glasgow. Into the start of Thursday evening, and clear spells for a time for Scotland, for the southeast as well. A lot of cloud elsewhere, showers increasingly pushing north, and then this more coherent band of rain moving in for Friday, so another unsettled day with spells of rain and wind to come, and the weekend looks similar. Bye-bye.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The The grotesque invasion of Ukraine has pulled into keen focus the indulgent and naive energy policy of the European continent, who have been sucking on Russian gas while closing domestic fossil fuel plants in order to transition to a carbon-free future. With the US blocking all Russian fuel imports and the EU professing it can survive until the end of winter without Kremlin-backed power pumping through Nord Stream 1 pipeline, Germany has once again pushed back, inextricably tangled in a long economic relationship with Russia. Successive chancellors have not only endorsed it, but promoted it, with one even sitting on the board of shareholders of Gazprom. Meanwhile, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has again reaffirmed the UK must rethink its energy policy with nothing off the table, despite machinery already moving into the Lancashire site this week, where shale gas had been fracked before a moratorium in 2019 to begin concreting over the wells, a process site operator Quadrilla says could take at least a year to reverse. Decisions need to be taken, and fast. Former head of MI6, the UK's Foreign Intelligence Services, Sir Richard Dearlove, told me that it was time for a major rethink on energy security.
I mean, look at us here in the UK. I mean, we're going to have to, as it were, significantly rethink energy security, which, in my opinion, is long overdue. We should perhaps go back to fracking. We probably need to try to become self-sufficient, which we could do in gas production. Okay, zero carbon policies have to be adjusted in the light of energy security policies, which I think should come first. It's a big rethink. It's a big rethink. And I mean, in Europe, of course, you know, there's been a real indulgence towards Russia and a wish to ignore the reality of the way that Russia's attitude to its sphere of influence has developed and changed under Putin. But we've had plenty of warnings. We've had plenty of warnings.
Well, I'm still joined by former Director of Global Operations at the Pentagon, Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt, who's also an expert in energy security policy. Mike, I couldn't think of anyone better to be sitting with me today to unpack all of this. The US has pushed for a complete ban on oil. The UK says it will only phase it out because it has a very distinct dependency on Russian diesel. We had Kwasi Kwarteng, the UK Business Secretary there, answering questions from the Commons and being quite close-lipped on what the government might be doing. He did not answer directly about fracking, but he did talk about renewables and nuclear still. In what direction do you think the UK should be going today? What is the quickest, easiest and simplest way to exercise ourselves from Russian energy imports and basically boost the grid as soon as possible?
Well, I think what we're watching right now is an overcommitment to climate change as an energy strategy, disregarding exactly what Sir Richard said, which is energy security, energy sovereignty, not just for our countries, but for these Eastern European countries that have been under the thumb of the EU with carbon taxing and really driving them into a renewable energy strategy that simply doesn't work for their growth and their abundant power. And the same here in the UK. We can go net zero here, but that's not a strategy that works externally. And so we really need to go back to, I believe, an all-the-above approach immediately. And some of these things won't happen overnight, particularly nuclear power. But I think a commitment to nuclear power as part of the UK energy mix, not just for this country, but to be able to export to our European allies who have really need the energy that we need to bring them. They're staring westward or they're looking eastward. They do not want their energy security from Russia and China. But we're not giving them an alternative right now. So I think it's important for the US and the UK to wake up to this overcommitment to climate change, which is defined by decarbonization, and go back to having abundant baseload power that is also clean and an all-the-above mixed strategy, and really focus on what does Ukraine need, what does Bulgaria need, what does Poland need, and they're looking to us to bring them that kind of energy. We are going to be entangled with Russia and China in energy for a long time, be it the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and be it other resources. We're going to have to find our way to understand how to disentangle from our adversaries when it comes to energy.
And the problem is that everything is sort of too little, too late, isn't it? These are debates that should have been happening a decade ago, 2 decades ago, and they haven't happened. And now it's very much that we're in a race against time. I was trying to look for whether there's a camera based above the Preston Lane fracking site, because there are reports that the trucks have moved in today to begin concreting over those wells. And there we had the business secretary on the floor of the Commons, unable to answer the question over whether that was still government policy.
I find it unbelievable that we're not thinking about being completely energy independent in this country right now. Fracking will be a key part of that. Forget climate change and decarbonization as the only metric and focus on having power to your homeowners, power to your industry, being less reliant on Russia and China, including Hinkley Point C, which has China General Nuclear involved in it, and understand what it means to have a UK-based energy strategy that can be exported to the rest of the world. It needs to happen. We need to balance the conversation of fracking. We need to balance the conversation of fossil fuel in general and recognize that we can maybe decarbonize more here in the UK, but the rest of the world can't. So going net zero here is meaningless to Ukraine right now and meaningless to the continent of Africa and others. So let's get back to a smart international approach to energy.
Mike, thank you ever so much. You are with GB News on TV and DAB radio. After the break, I'll be hearing from a British Ukrainian student on the incredible risks she took to help a friend flee from the war. Now it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:31. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Boris Johnson says the number of Ukrainian refugees coming to the UK will rise very sharply to hundreds of thousands, with further routes to welcome them set out in the next few days. Ukraine's ambassador to the UK has said that his officials would help to deal with the refugees if the visa rules were lifted. But the Prime Minister says we have to have checks to avoid unnecessary security risks. Meanwhile, Downing Street has announced that a new visa processing centre in Lille in France will begin accepting appointments from tomorrow. The Labour leader has challenged the Prime Minister on the UK's rising energy bills, which he says are due to pressures before Russia invaded Ukraine. Well, it says UK drivers are hit by the second largest daily hike in diesel prices for more than 20 years. The average cost of a litre is now at a record 165.2 pence. The UK has promised to phase out Russian oil by the end of the year. The United Nations nuclear watchdog says the loss of power at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine will not have a critical impact on safety. The statement comes after Ukraine's foreign minister called for an urgent ceasefire to allow power to be restored over fears that the plant risked releasing radiation into the air. Russia seized control of Chernobyl last month. In some other news now, a climber has died on Ben Nevis in Scotland. It's the third fatality in the region in the last 5 days. Rescuers work to reach 17 people stranded on Britain's highest mountain. You're up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, as debates rage over the hesitancy of NASA and how far they are prepared, NATO, and how far they are prepared to go to assist Ukraine, others are finding it hard to predict quite how Putin might react. I asked former head of MI6 Richard Dearlove how he read the situation and what could happen next, asking him too about Putin's rumoured cognitive decline and volatility.
The avoidance of a World War III, which I guess is what we're talking about, is, vital for the future of humanity, not to put too fine a point on it. I think what's also worrying is the speculation, and it is speculation, that maybe Putin's behavior, maybe his rationality is prejudiced or compromised by illness. I mean, the best explanation, which we don't know whether it's correct or not, is that he may have Parkinson's. That certainly, I've heard from several neurologists who say that, loss of restraint, psychosis are very common Parkinson's symptoms. And then there's visual evidence that he may be on steroids because of the way his appearance has changed. Yeah, I think it's very worrying. And okay, let's suppose that's the case. We don't know that someone in that position who seems so dominant, has his finger on the nuclear button. Yes, that's very worrying.
Based on what we've seen so far, if you were to play this forward tentatively, what do you think could be lying in wait?
Well, I think militarily it's going to be hard for the Ukrainians to resist indefinitely, particularly if the Russians pull out all their heavy weapons and start, as I have said, rubberizing the cities. But to occupy the cities and then to occupy the country is certainly beyond their capability. I mean, talking to military friends, they say even a force of 600,000 would not be able to hold down a conquered Ukraine. There will be an insurgency, or there would be an insurgency, which would be supplied from the West with very sophisticated weapons. There has to be at some point a negotiation, or this will be a catastrophe, I think, for the Russians, and I can't see them retiring. But on the other hand, if they've got to fight the whole of the Ukrainian population or male population, it looks as though they might have to. The cost to both sides is going to be extreme. I mean, at the moment, maybe at some point there's a ceasefire, because it's going so badly for the Russians. It looks as though the Ukrainians are prepared to pay an ultimate cost. Are the Russians prepared to pay an ultimate cost?
Well, let's return to the thoughts of Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt, who still joins me in the studio. I mean, you had there the former head of MI6 using the word psychosis and saying that there's speculation out there that Vladimir Putin has Parkinson's disease, that his cognitive ability could be impaired, and he could therefore be reacting irrationally. How on earth do you deal with a situation like that?
Well, I I'm a little concerned that the former head of the intelligence community wants to simplify this conversation to one of mental health of Vladimir Putin. I think it's much more complex than that. I think back to the end of the Cold War when we had studied the Soviet Union, we understood their psyche, we understood what motivated people like Vladimir Putin. And we really took our eye off of Russia for the last 25 years and didn't understand what motivates him, what motivates the people. And I really hark back to Reagan and Thatcher during the negotiation for the fall of the Soviet Union, where they understood that Russia had to feel safe and secure, just as we had to. And you can't compromise on that. And so I think what we have is a leader who believes that the fall of the Soviet Union was a mistake. He believes we have overplayed our hand with respect to diminishing Russia's stature in the world. They have actually become nothing more than a petro economy. And I think there are many other factors other than his mental health that have driven him to the decisions that he's making. And I think we gave up our expertise on Russia.
But if he is in some form of cognitive decline, then that makes it incredibly difficult to anticipate what his next moves would be. And you can understand perhaps therefore why there might be so much hesitancy within NATO as to what sort of intervention they can stage.
It has to be factored in. It has always been factored in with world leaders. What is their mental state? What motivates them? I believe we've cornered Vladimir Putin for years. We've had successive presidents that have reached out to Vladimir Putin, both as a friend, but then at the same time, diminished his role on the world stage in very aggressive ways by taking up more and more countries into the NATO architecture. I think what he has is the backing of China. And so while we're very concerned about his mental state, I believe, and he has so many miscalculations he's done on this invasion of Ukraine that we could spend an hour talking about. He's going to find his way into some resolution of this that he maintains power in. And I think, unfortunately, the losers in this are the Russian people.
Mike, thank you. Well, you have read the room wrong. The message to Priti Patel, who has been under fire trying to defend the UK's offensively hesitant and meagre refugee policy. Asylum seekers remain a toxic topic for the government, but where once the public chastised the Home Office for its inept handling of illegal crossings over the Channel, today they call on the government to do more for those fleeing war in Ukraine. This programme has been covering the heart-wrenching and stomach-churning journeys of a number of Brits desperately scrambling to help their families as bombs fell on Ukraine. Now, since Russia launched a full-scale war against Ukraine, thousands of people have escaped the country. Our reporter Bradley Harris is in Medyka, which is near the border between Poland and Ukraine. What is the situation there, Brad?
Well, Alex, as we know, over 2 million Ukrainians have fled the country. A lot of those people, over 1.2 million, have headed towards Poland. I'm on the most busiest border crossing, as you say, in Medyka. It's incredible the types of people that are coming through. We have people of all ages, 84, 85-year-olds I've seen children as young as 5 and 6. We've had babies, all sorts of people, animals, dogs even. Some people tell me that they won't leave their home in Ukraine unless they can take their pets with them. Walking around Medyka, particularly the border here, I've come across so many areas of support, piles and piles of clothes that are there for free, and this baby milk truck, because of course, as I say, there are so many children coming through the border. We've already in the last 5 or so minutes had 2 mothers rushing in with prams saying, milk, we need milk for my baby, because they are coming here with hardly anything. They are scrambling to flee their country and having, for some people, only minutes to pack the essentials. We'll open the door and just take a quick look inside. My cameraman Jose is going to go in and just show you some of the people who are receiving free support. And this isn't just from Polish people, this is from people all over the world. Benito Escat has come, 3 days you've been travelling, Benito. Where have you come from?
Hi, we are coming from Minorca. It's a Balearic island in Spain.
Minorca. Just tell me, how have you been supporting people today?
Today, more or less, I think we have around 35 moms with a double of childs.
And one's coming out now, actually. One's coming out right now. A baby with her child is now being fed. This is a Ukrainian that has come through the border in the last few hours. Two mothers, and these were the two mothers that came earlier. And look at this. Live on GB News, we have food being donated to people. Because, as I say, people come here with nothing. Benito
Sorry,
no, it's okay. You're speaking to us, and you also have a job to do, and you're doing this for free. What kinds of people? We saw the mums there, but this is all the time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all the time like this. That is a war. We find only moms and big persons and childs. All the men, they are in Ukraine, and these women and these child, they arrive completely destroyed, because you are thinking they are coming from different parts from Ukraine to arrive in advance to the border Ukrainian. They stay some days in a big industrial area. They tell me there are more 2,000 sorry, my English is not so good. 2,000 persons and babies and women inside this industrial area. They pick little by little buses just until here.
Where are you getting your food and milk from?
Yes, the first meal, the first packet from all of these things, I buy it from my pocket, but I finish the first day all.
So the money comes out of your own pocket?
Yeah, all the truck, the rental truck, the travel, the petrol, the food, the first food, they are paid with my pocket, but it was finished the first day. But here we receive a lot of food for children and Pampers, and we distribute from the other persons.
Benito, really good to chat to you, and just an incredible effort that you're doing.
Look Instagram from Baby Milk
We will. This is just
followers.
Thank you, Benito. Thank you. Incredible passion and incredible effort from people not just here in Poland, but all over the world.
Yeah, a remarkable reports there of women fleeing bombs in Ukraine with babies, desperate to get their children milk. Well, Ken Stewart was in Kiev with his Ukrainian wife and newborn baby as troops amassed on the border, and was in a fight against time to get a visa for his child before it was too late. Well, I'm delighted to say that Ken joins us again now. Ken, it's fantastic to see you again. The last time we spoke, you were still in a race against the clock to try and get your wife and your baby out, but I understand you've managed to do it.
Yeah, it's quite a task. Hi, nice to see you again. Yeah, last time I spoke to you, I was in my kitchen or living room, I can't remember, in my house, which is now under siege. And on the second day of the invasion, we decided to get out. I mean, we'd already made the decision, but we left on the second day about 8 a.m. By that evening, we arrived on the border about 6 miles from the border control point, and that's where the queue started. And we were exhausted by this time. We'd already driven across the country, and it was very stressful because we went parallel with the Belarus border. We were expecting, or half expecting, to see Russian tanks at any moment. So we drove across, we got to the border, we got to the queue, and we decided we weren't going to stay there that night. So we went, got a hotel room. We were extremely lucky to get the last hotel room in the city, about 45 minutes from the border. And we stayed the night there, and then we were woken up in the middle of the night by air raid sirens about 4 or 5 times. But we gauged it that it was, it was going to be a false alarm. So we just slept the night there as well as we could. Early the next morning, we joined this line that you see in the picture now. This is taken from my car. That line was 9 kilometers long, and it moved extremely slowly. And so we were in that line for 40 hours, and it was pretty extreme. I mean, it's luxury, really. We had our nice car, but try sitting in a car for 40 hours in a queue with 2 small children, one of who was only 2.5 weeks old. And we eventually got to the border the following day. I think it was Sunday evening. And we went through the chaos of exiting Ukraine. I mean, it was chaos. People really were trying to be ordered. No one was fighting. No one was trying to push to the front. People were pretty great, actually. But it was hard. And eventually we got to the Polish side. And the problem with this trip is that each stage that you get to, they don't realize what you've been through. So you've been through this kind of hellish experience, and then they put another barricade in front of you, and you go through another one. And then you get past that one, then you get to the next one. And finally, we got to the one which was the British visa for my wife, which we had to apply for in Warsaw. I mean, they made no concessions for us whatsoever, none. So we had to go to a special visa processing center in Warsaw. Luckily, we were able to stay in a hotel right in the same building. We were very lucky in that way. But my wife had to go through all the biometrics, had to go and print out documents and scan documents. It took 3 hours just for that part. They said it would take 15 minutes. And then we had to wait basically the best part of a week before we could come back to the UK. And when we did come back to the UK, we didn't actually have a visa in my wife's passport because they'd run out of them. And I mean, they'd only given 50, apparently, to Ukrainians by that point, but they'd run out of vignettes. So when we arrived at Heathrow, border control, they detained us. And not for very long, but long enough for us to miss our flight, our connecting flight to Scotland. And so, you know, as I'm saying, each stage of this journey, you go through obstacle after obstacle, and they don't really understand what you've been through. And it was tough. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Ken. I'm so pleased. I mean, one of many millions of people, and it's amazing. We've been speaking to you a few times on this programme, and delighted to see that you've managed to get to safety. And thank you for sharing your story and telling our audience quite how complicated the process has been, and quite how much the UK government now needs to get their acts together to help other people like you. Always a pleasure talking to you, Ken. Now, the world has watched in astonishment and admiration at the courage and bravery of everyday Ukrainians joining the resistance. For men, there is little choice. Those aged between 18 and 60 face being conscripted on the spot as wives, sisters and daughters join long caravans of refugees. Well, we're joined now by Valentina Brutenko, who's a British student who was raised in Ukraine. Now, Valentina, you were actually visiting your father in Ukraine when the invasion happened. You've managed to get back, but you want to return to Ukraine, is that right?
Yes. Well, for me, there's really no question. My country is currently experiencing a complete attack on its identity. I would directly call it a genocide. If you look at the rhetoric from Putin, from Russia's government, if you look at the way this war is being conducted, the bombing and the murder of civilians, they talk about denazification. I'm not sure why they think our children deserve to be murdered for this denazification. So for me, you know, to return to Ukraine is almost a moral call where I need to be next to my country right now and next to my people, because at times it feels like this identity, this Ukrainianness is under such direct attack. You need to hold on to it for as much as you can.
I mean, what was it like when you went to visit your father and then all of a sudden you find yourself embroiled in a war that few people managed to predict coming to pass? I mean, that must have been terrifying. To now get back to safety, where I understand your mother and your brother live in the UK, and say, I want to go back to a war zone. What on earth does your mother think of this? How frightening was it when the bombs were falling? And what on earth does your family think about you wanting to go back there?
Well, of course, the beginning of the war and, you know, that moment, which I will probably never forget, in the morning when I woke up to an explosion and my house is shaking, and you kind of have this instantaneous understanding that your life and the life of your family and everything that was your reality, it suddenly changes. But you know, this is a message that has been given by our president, by a lot of Ukrainians. Yes, there is a practical, physical fear of what is happening, and you know, when there was bombings and we had to hide out in bomb shelters physically. Of course, I was trembling, I'm terrified. But mentally, I never wanted to run, and I still don't want to run, because this is my country and this is my people, and we have to fight for what is ours, for our freedom. If there's one thing Ukrainians understand, is that freedom isn't just given to you. It's something you have to fight for. And my family understands that as well. Of course, we all fear for each other's safety. Of course, we want to protect each other, but we understand that there is something larger than just personal safety. And that is those ideals of freedom and democracy in our land, in our territory, that we will defend until the end.
Surely, have you got a concrete plan for what you're going to do when you're there, quite what you can do? Are you not scared for your life?
Am I scared for my life? Possibly at times, but the understanding of what is at stake right now, and once again, it is the entire future of my people, of my country, of the very concept of Ukrainianness, that is a lot bigger to me than anything personal. In terms of what I'm going to do, I'm going to continue doing what I was when I was in the ground in Ukraine. I'm lucky enough with my dad to be settled in Western Ukraine, where it's relatively safe. We have a lot of refugees coming in there now. We are trying to resettle them, setting up shelters, feeding them, providing them routes to get out of the country if they possibly can. The reason I came back to the UK is because, from seeing the humanitarian crisis on the ground, from seeing what's going on, I understand that we need more aid, and not just humanitarian aid, we need aid to our army. Because humanitarian aid, unfortunately, it doesn't win wars. Weapons win wars. Military defense systems win wars, which is why we've been calling on the West, on Boris Johnson, on NATO to close the sky, or at least if you're not going to close the sky, give us the air defense equipment to close our own sky, because we will fight for our country. So to me, I've come here to raise funds, to give more to the army, to deliver tactical gear if we can to our soldiers. And, none of us, not a single Ukrainian, is going to stop until we have our country and our people back.
Valentina, you are incredibly brave. Thank you so much for coming in and telling me that. I wish you all the best, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all we've got time for. Sorry, it's made me blub a bit. And now that's it for me for today. Let's go on to Dan McCaffrey and the briefing. Bye-bye.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon. A fine day to come in the east with some sunshine, but wet in the west, especially western Scotland and Northern Ireland, and increasingly windy, particularly in the northwest, ahead of a weather front which is moving in very slowly from the Atlantic. The isobars squeezing together ahead of that front, with the risk of gales or even severe gales during the morning across western Scotland and Northern Ireland. But those winds do ease as the front moves through. It's a slow-moving front, but it gives some heavy rain for western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, and then eventually that rain pushing into Wales and the southwest. A blustery day for most, but actually that wind coming from the south means that for central and eastern England it's sunny skies and mild 12 to 14 Celsius, but it turns colder for Scotland and Northern Ireland behind the front, and the rain falls as snow for a time across the Grampians and Highlands above 400 metres during